It's a really very tricky topic. It's a very delicate topic because people often hear what they want to hear when we talk about these things. So I'm a degreed geologist. I've been studying climate and geology as well as magnetic fields of the Earth since the 1970s, when I first realized we were keeping records of these the Earth's magnetic fields, for example. And as a geologist, I've had the opportunity and I have the skills to look into the past and see if Earth is broken. Are we broken right now? Is this truly an anomalous time? Nature works in vast cycles and expanses of time. Nature doesn't work like in a 5-year cycle necessarily or a 10-year cycle. So what I have been able to see and what I share in the programs is that if you look at the ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, each year there's a new layer of ice that is deposited that contains atmospheric information, dust particles from volcanoes, little air bubbles that it captures in the ice that have the carbon dioxide for that particular year in that air bubble. So we can go back into those ice cores and we can reconstruct climate. And the ice cores in Antarctica, the deepest core now goes back over 420,000 years before present. Humans, anatomically modern humans, showed up on the Earth, and scientists agree to this timeline, 200,000 years ago. So that means there was 240,000 years before humans ever showed up. We have these records for it, and if you look at the cycles, they're the same cycles. Climate is cyclic, and I've been saying this now for over 40 years, asking us to prepare for the climate change rather than trying to think that we can somehow prevent the climate change. So where are we right now? We are precisely where I would expect we should be. There is a warming on the planet. It is a relatively small warming compared to what we have seen in the past. If you look at the cores from the past, the warmings are intense, they're brief, and after the warming, it's what comes after that is usually the bigger problem, is the cooling cycle. There's evidence now that we are moving into a cooling cycle. Doesn't mean an ice age, doesn't mean like Hollywood, everything's going to freeze over. But even a little shift in climate globally changes the weather locally. It changes when it rains, when it snows, when you plant the crops, when you can harvest the crops. In the northern hemisphere, where most of the food of the world is grown, this is significant. Just a half a degree Celsius can change all kinds of things, surface temperature as well as ocean temperatures. So the bottom line for me is climate change is a fact, and I don't see how anyone could possibly deny that. Humans did not cause it. Humans are contributing by kicking the carbon dioxide into the air, but this is where it gets really interesting. There was a scientific study, it's called the Inconvenient Study, that is not being shared in the mainstream. A scientist named Rockström, I think who's in Sweden, they published this in a very prestigious peer-reviewed journal called Nature, where they talk about Earth's safe zone. So Earth has what is called a safe zone, and these are the parameters that must be held in place for us to maintain life as we know it. There are 8 parameters, as a circle with wedges for each of the different parameters. Climate is only one of those 8 parameters, and climate is probably one of the least to worry about right now. 3 of the other parameters, we're already off the charts on 3 of the other parameters. One of those is biodiversity. We're losing life faster than we can even catalog it, primarily in the oceans. That's important because that's where the food chain begins, with the microscopic life all the way up to the larger forms of life. There are other cycles that are not so sexy to talk about, the phosphorus cycle, the nitrogen cycle. These are off the charts as well. So to say that climate is the only problem and the only thing to worry about, I think it's not correct. And to think that we can stop it and reverse the climate, I think, is disingenuous for any politician or any scientist to say that. First of all, why would you want to go back when we're part of a natural rhythm that is largely driven by Earth's location in space? The tilt, the angle, and the wobble of Earth in space determines our relationship to the sun. And there's more to it than that, but that is largely what's driving these cycles. So if you look at the ice cores, multiple cores from Antarctica and Greenland, they all correlate with one another. And they all show us in the past we've had temperatures much warmer, and afterward we go into the cooling cycle. The carbon dioxide that we're adding may be enhancing, it may be accelerating, it is not causing what it is happening. And this is where it gets dangerous, because there are people that want to hear that. And they say, okay, so we can keep doing everything we're doing now because it's a natural cycle. And I'm not saying that at all. We definitely need to go clean, green, stop burning the fossil fuels. We have so many other alternatives. I'll say something very controversial. As a geologist, not many people want to hear what I'm going to say. Oil is such a precious resource. And we, as technologically advanced as we are, we have no way of chemically reproducing oil right now. So when it's gone, whenever that happens. We use oil in so many other ways that cannot be replaced if there is no oil. I have a list of over 3,000 applications in our daily lives. And people, when you think about not burning oil for a day, and what most people think is, that's okay, I can ride a bike or walk to work. And I say, that's true. I say, where does the rubber come from for the tires on the bike that you're going to ride? And it just goes on and on. The clothes that we wear, the fabrics, the way the fabrics are made, the way produce is taken to market. So I think it's such a precious resource. We need to continue to produce it and preserve it, but stop burning it. And this way of thinking is less threatening to the oil industry, because we're not trying to make them obsolete. We're saying you are creating a precious resource. But when you stop burning it, that is the impetus for the technology to come in to find other sources for fuel for transportation. A big part of the problem is the politicians, and we also hear that there's a consensus among scientists, and that's not true. There is a data set that has been supplied to scientists that is based on false assumptions of computer modeling. That data set is what scientists are saying. If the data is correct, then we agree with it. But the data is incorrect. So it's a trick, because if you give someone the false information, but they don't know it's false, and it supports a perspective, then everyone's going to say, yeah, I support that. There's a growing number of mainstream scientists, climate scientists and geologists, climatologists, meteorologists, that are not on board with the story, but they don't have a platform. It's based on computer models. They take information, feed it into a model, and the model is supposed to predict what's happening with the climate. These models are so flawed that we can take data from years that have already passed, plug in the data for what has already happened, and the model still can't even tell us what actually happened. That's how wrong this, usually if the event has already occurred, and you take that data, put in the model, if it's a good model, it will show you what just occurred. The models don't even do that. So it's very complex. There's some very disingenuous efforts going on to manipulate the data to tell a story. But the bottom line for me is, as we learn to think differently about ourselves and our relationship to the earth, we begin to live differently. We begin to have deeper respect for our relationship to the earth, for the food and the way we grow our food, for what that food means to us in terms of food security and things like that. I mean, these are big, these are global issues, but they also become local issues very, very quickly. So we could stop burning fossil fuels today. It's not going to stop climate change. And let me tell you how far this is going. There are scientists that are so frightened now by the false data, they're going to extremes to try to stop the climate change. So some of them have said, because it's based on Earth's location in space, tilt, angle, wobble, maybe we need to change the tilt, the angle, and the wobble to stop the climate change. I think there are certain things we should not be messing with, and Earth's location in space is one of those. Also the idea of putting metallic particles into the atmosphere to reflect the sunlight, the consequences of the byproducts of those in our food supply and our food chain and our water. I don't know how well that's been thought through, but it's causing problems. And those are extremes to remedy a problem based on false information. So here's the thing, we've been taught to resist the change. If it changes, if it's not summer in August the way it was 15 years ago, we think something is wrong. If we acknowledge, if we say, okay, this generation, we're living a time of climate change, and if we adapt to this change, we're going to get through it a little bit better. So for example, bury our power grid under the earth in the United States, for example. Northeastern United States, they're having bad storms in the winter. They freeze, you get ice, break the power lines snap, and people are without power for weeks and weeks. You bury those power lines, first of all, you've got jobs for a lot of people burying those power lines. Secondly, you stop using the trees to create the power poles that break every time there's the big storm. And third, when that storm comes in, yeah, it's a tough storm, but hospitals don't lose power, schools don't lose power, and people, learn to adapt. But what we're trying to do is say we're going to live the way we've always lived, even though the conditions of the world have changed. It makes no sense, and that's where the suffering comes from.